ceremonies this evening, and I just cannot tell you how exciting it is for me, and I forgot my next line, but that's okay. I will remember it in a moment here. It's hard to take off this coat. I've already messed up, excuse me. I'm nervous today. You know, the memory kind of slips as you age. No. Really?
We don't have any experience with that.
Well, I'm glad you came to visit with me to learn how this all began, and well, let's see. Well, where shall I start? Charlie, I do believe his family came to Texas when he was 9 years of age, and most of the time he could be found out in the fields and looked like he was just dreaming, but he was really observing nature, and most people thought, well, is there anything going to come of that boy? Well, little did they know that he would be the greatest cattleman, rancher, blazing trails, raising the finest herd of cattle in all of the Panhandle. And as for myself, my family, I was born in Tennessee and raised in Kentucky, where my father was a prominent lawyer and a general attorney. And my family came to Texas when I was 14 years of age, and my mother, she died when I was 16, and I, being the oldest and only girl, was helped my father raise my brothers. And well, my two oldest brothers went to war, and about that same time, my father had an unfortunate accident and died, and I was left behind to take care of my three younger brothers, Lee, Sam, and Walter. I was able to find employment in Weatherford as a teacher, and I was escorted there by a soldier, as there were still Indian raids at the time. And I stayed at the hotel that was owned and operated by Charlie's mother, and in 1864 there I met the dashing young Civil War veteran. And Charlie, he was a scout for the Army and Ranger, Texas Ranger. My Charlie. And, well, he was very successful. Those are the stories I heard, and it's because he worked so hard. He hardly ever rested or stopped to eat, but when he was at Fort Belknap, he would insist on walking me to school every day. Now, I understood that our courtship was long, as Charlie was off on the cattle drives for months at a time. And I understand that first year, he acquired an old Army wagon made of hardwood, and the wheels were made of iron, and he fashioned a chuck box on the back side of it for the cook, and he needed that wagon to hold supplies and be a beacon to his cowboys as they traveled 700 miles from Texas through New Mexico to Fort Sumter. When they arrived at Fort Sumter, that's where they sold the cattle to the Army, as they needed the beef to feed the starving Indians that were on the reservation there. Well, now the trail drives were very dangerous, is my understanding, and the Indians would steal the horses and cattle, and the weather was relentless. We had snakes, and going through New Mexico, they went over 80 miles of desert, and they crossed the Pecos River several times. One part was alkaline, and well, if the cattle drank from it, they died, and another part was quicksand. That first year, Charlie lost hundreds of cattle and a few good men, but he still made a profit. And he learned from that cattle drive, and he shared his experiences with all the other cattlemen that came up that same trail after him. And one of them being Oliver Loving, whom he formed a partnership with, and they trailed 3 times together, and on the 3rd time, well, Oliver was in an Indian fight, and he got an arrow in the arm, and well, it became gangrene, and the surgeon at Fort Sumter had to amputate, but it was too late. He was dying, and Charlie was at his bedside, and he promised his partner that he would take his body all the way back to Weatherford at the Masonic Lodge. He promised him he would share his profits over the next 2 years with all of his family. And to this day, Charlie holds a special place in his heart for his old partner, as he was a true friend. The cattle drives only lasted 20 years, but they were the financial savior of Texas after the Civil War.
happened to the brothers that you were raising up?
Oh, they came with me. Oh, I remember now. I'm so sorry. Well, as Charlie was off on the cattle drives, I was there at Belknap, and I had many suitors. But I did take Charlie's hand in marriage in 1870, and we went to Kentucky for the wedding at my uncle's home. And we shortly thereafter went to Pueblo, Colorado, where he had established a ranch. And well, I will never forget the first day I rode into town, and I was horrified at the sight of two cattle thieves hanging from the telegraph pole. I turned to Charlie and I said, I will not abide by this vigilante justice. I do not know why they did not wait for the circuit judge. And Charlie was newly married and did not know how to comfort me. He said, well, I don't think it hurt the telegraph pole. Charlie, my Charlie. Well, he did agree that he would take me back to Texas because I was insisting, and he said, well, why don't we rest first? And he made it a point to introduce me to the fine ladies of the town, and I did find them of like mind and culture as and well, we were there for 6 more years. And while we were there, Charlie invested into the banking business and in civic houses like the Opera House and land holdings. But also I want to tell you this: he did plant a beautiful apple orchard that is still there today. But the drought and the panic of 1873 happened and wiped him out, and he had to sell his land to pay the taxes. Well, he still had 1,800 head of cattle, and he wanted to find new grazing land, so he and I agreed that I would go to California to spend time with my relatives there, while he and his stepbrother would go to Texas to find new land. And there they came upon the Palo Duro Canyon, and Charlie was amazed by the vastness of it all. He was so excited. He went quickly back up to Pueblo and trailed his cattle down, and with his cowboys, he wrote me a letter and told me all about it and how excited he was. And, well, I was impatient and corresponded back, and I said, either you come out here to civilization where I am, or I will come there where you are. Meet me in Denver 2 weeks after you get this letter. Well, Charlie was already on his way back up to Denver. And there at the brokerage firm, he met Mr. John George Adair, who was a wealthy Englishman, one of the many Europeans who came over to invest their money into all kinds of business enterprises. And John was looking for a good cattleman, and he heard about Charlie. They met. They made an agreement. And when I arrived, well, they had 4 wagons ready of 6 months' provisions. I believe we had 1,000 pounds of flour, 1,000 pounds of sugar, wire and fencing. And, well, I quickly met Mr. and Mrs. Adair, and we set out on our journey for our new life with 4 other cowboys and 100 bulls. And we went over 400 miles of an endless sea of prairie grass. There were no trees, no bushes, no trading post, and we became weary and tired. And well, on the 10th day we had run out of water 2 days back, and I was driving the wagon, and Charlie galloped up and he said, I've got to find water, I've got to do it. And I want you to, I'm going to go ahead of you. I want you to watch me and point your wagon in the direction where you see me go over the horizon. Well, I did as my husband had directed, and no more than he got over that horizon came galloping up a cowboy that said, Indians, Indians! And, well, I stopped the wagon and I took up field glasses, and well, yes, there they were. Everybody, circle the wagon, circle the wagons. We have to take cover, we have to take cover. We were there the better part of the day, and oh, the agony was awful. We thought we were going to be scalped and left for dead before Charlie came back. Well, I looked to make sure, yes, they're there, but they didn't come any closer. Then here came Charlie about sundown, and he rode up, and he was irritated. He said, "What the hell's the matter, Mary? What have you been doing here?" Charlie, the Indians, the Indians." Well, he took up the field glasses, and he said, "Well, those Indians are no more than bear grass and a mirage." Well, I was relieved, and well, that night at midnight, we finally did get all the wagons and the animals to water. And we rested there for 3 more days before we started back on our journey. And it took 7 more days, and then all of a sudden there was the most magnificent, beautiful land I had ever seen in my life. Well, Mrs. Adair, Cornelia, she got down from her horse. She was a fine horsewoman. I got down from the wagon, and we went to the cap rock and looked down, and the sides of the canyon wall were beautiful, different colors, and the sun, it cast a shadow of orange and purple. It was just so amazing. We were overwhelmed, and there, by the gleaming river, to our amazement, were thousands and thousands of buffalo. We thought they had all been slaughtered, but oh, we were in tears. The exhilaration was, like I said, overwhelming. Well, we finally made camp, and that night came up a fierce storm. It was raining hard. There was lightning and thunder, and the buffalo stampeded at the bed of the canyon. Well, I thought they were going to come right up the canyon and run over us, and I didn't know if I was going to make it through the night. Well, of course I did. The next day, the cowboys, they started building a road down the steep incline of the canyon, and well, they didn't have hand tools and no blasting powder. I don't know how they built that 4-mile road, but well, then we couldn't take the wagons down. So they had to take them apart and put them on pack mules and take it down little by little, all our provisions. And Charlie had to trail the bulls down in a single file. Well, we finally got down to the bed of the canyon, and they had to put it all back together. Took us several more days, and we finally arrived at the 2-room cabin that Charlie had built, and we were relieved from our journey. Mr. and Mrs. Adair stayed for 2 more weeks. You see, Mr. Adair agreed to finance Charlie's endeavor as the cattle business took lots of money, and they signed a contract, and they went out and looked at the land, and one afternoon, Mr. Adair tried my patience. Callahan came in and sat down at our dinner table, and Mr. Adair said, "I do not sit at the table with servants." And I told him plainly, I said, "Any Callahan that is good enough to work for us is good enough to sit at my table." Well, Mr. and Mrs. Adair moved to another table. And all the years that were there, Mr. Adair only visited 2 more times before he died, and he left everything to Cornelia. Of course, she was easy to get along with. Well, after they left, I began to make my house a home, and the cowboys, they had to drive the buffalo 15 miles away so the cattle could graze. And no more that happened, then the word got out that the buffalo were there. Here come the buffalo hunters, and they commenced in their slaughter. And I heard the rifles go off all day, and I jumped at every single shot. I was sickened by the slaughter. They'd take the hides and leave the meat there to rot. The stench was awful. And they'd leave the calves to starve to death. And one night, I heard the pitiful bawl of a calf. I thought it had been injured, so I took my rifle and I went out there to put it out of its misery, and there were 2 calves crying. I went back to the cabin and I asked Charlie, "Please bring those calves into the corral. I will nurse them by hand myself." And to this day, our herd is over 250 buffalo. And Charlie, in later years, he had crossed that buffalo with cattle, which he called the cattle row. That first year was hard on all of us. I was the only woman there. The nearest settlement was 200 miles away, but I did take comfort to learn that 3 months later, our neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Bugby, were 75 miles north of us, there in the Panhandle. And Well, we didn't see anyone outside the ranch for 6 months to a year, let alone get a letter on newspaper. And I did keep myself busy. I'd ride the range with Charlie, and I wanted to know everything about nature there. I wanted to learn about the cottonwood and the berry trees and the birds and the insects. Why, we were even entertained by the little prairie dogs every now and then. But my side saddle was very rough, and Charlie was kind enough to fashion a 2-horn saddle for me so I'd have a place to rest my left leg. Well, that made it easier for me to take Cake and Cobbler out to the boys at Fall Range when they were gathering up the stray cattle. I would visit with them because I felt sorry for those boys. Most of them were no more than 16 years of age, and, well, they would also come to the cabin, and I'd write the letters to the families and the sweethearts. They missed them so. I would mend their clothes and tend to them when they were ill, and they would tell me their troubles, and I would keep their confidence, and, well, I was like a mother or a sister to them. Boys, what is that commotion going on out there? Well, come on in here, Lee. Bring Walter here. Walter, come over here. Now, I want you to sit right here, Walter. Now, let's see what it is we need to do for your hand. Sit right there. Let me see your hand, Walter. Well, what have you done? Well, let me get my prickly pear of salve here, and we'll just put it on that wound of yours. Okay, now, this will heal that wound. Now, boys, Lee, now you boys go on. I have company, can you not see? Oh, and Sam, excuse me, Walter, would you please ask Sam to bring in some firewood? Well, I know it's spring, but it's still chilly in the evening time. Thank you, thank you. I'm so sorry for the interruption. Let me see, where was I now? Cowboys. Oh, there's some kind of me. One afternoon, a cowboy had brought 3 chickens to me in a sack, and I was going to cook them for Sunday supper. He said, "Oh no, Aunt Molly, those I brought them for your pets." Well, no one would ever know what comfort those chickens brought to me. I would call to them, and they would come to me, and they would follow me everywhere I went. I would talk to them, and they would talk to me in their own language. Listen, can you hear it? The endless wind on the prairie would drive one mad. Well, if it hadn't been for all the outside dangers and the wind, it would not have been so lonely out there. But our cowboys were loyal to us, as I do believe it's because Charlie was strict on them. He said no gambling, no drinking, and no fighting. And, well, our best cook was fired for coming to work drunk. And my brother Walter got kicked off later because he was found gambling. Oh, my brothers, there's something else. They were all there with me, helping on the ranch. Well, the next year, Quanah Parker and his braves returned to their old homeland, to the Paladud, and they began stealing cattle there. And, well, Charlie decided to go out and meet with Quanah, and he made a treaty with him, and he said, "Your braves can come every other day and get 2 cattle, just so long they do not get the pure red cattle that I have separated out with barbed wire." Charlie was the first in the region to use the barbed wire for that purpose. Well, then later, Charlie decided to invite them to an old buffalo hunt, and they all rode together out to the Cap Rock, and Charlie watched them look down on their old hunting ground, and Charlie quivered in his heart. He knew how distressed they were. They were longing to be there. And he felt so bad for taking the land from them, he decided that he would go to Congress to talk on their behalf. And for myself, I thought of Quanah's mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, who had been captured by the Comanches when she was 9 years old, and she grew up with them and had a life there until Charlie and the Texas Rangers recaptured her and took her back to her English family, and there she grieved so for her own life because that's all she knew. And then her daughter, Prairie Flower, died. And it pains me so to think of it that Cynthia Ann died of a broken heart. Well, the J.A. Ranch grew under the direction and management of Charlie, and with his cowboys, they built over 50 houses and lots of roads, and they built corrals and water tanks. We even had our own blacksmith shop and our post office, and we built churches and schools. And one afternoon, we did have a circuit preacher visit, and we had him over for lunch, dinner, and well, Charlie was at one end of the table, and he was eating his dinner and looking over his financial books. And I was trying to get the conversation going on with the preacher. And I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Oklahoma." Well, Charlie was in midstream of eating his peas, didn't even look up, and he said, "Take no good person from Oklahoma." I said, "Charlie, you know good people from Oklahoma." He was still in midstream, and he looked up and he said, "Damn scarce, damn scarce." Well, my Charlie might be rough on the outside, but I know how tender-hearted he is, because we opened our house for all to come for festivities during the holidays, and the cowboys would come from thousands of miles away, and Charlie would always encourage them to save their own money for their own lands and their families and their own cattle. And well, the boys surprised me one year. They took a collection and bought this beautiful silver tea set for me from New York, and I have cherished it so. Well, Charlie knew that when the Fort Worth Denver Railroad was built in 1887, he knew what was coming. More farmers, more settlers, and he knew that all the big ranches would be divided. He made it a point to go to Austin to fight for fair lease laws. He always thought of his community, his fellow man. And then he decided he wanted a smaller ranch, so he asked Mrs. Adair to end the contract, and she agreed, and Charlie received 1/3 of everything they did together. And that's when we moved to our present home here in Goodnight. And we have looked so forward to this day so we could educate our youth in not only reading and writing and arithmetic, but we wanted to show them how to live and survive on the Panhandle as we did. We want to teach them about vegetation, the plants, and all the animals, the buffalo, the elk, the antelope. And, well, we're going to even open our home to the youth if they need to stay with us. They can pay for the tuition either with the cattle or chickens, or well, they can even work on our dairy here. Well, we have come full circle, and we have seen the plains transformed and all our early dreams realized after spending a lifetime in a place we dearly love. And Charlie, I think I said that he had those strict rules, and the boys, they also were very reverent as well. I insisted they stop every day and come to the house for service. Our scripture today is Deuteronomy 33:27. The eternal God is our refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace of mind, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. I told the boys they were never alone out there. Well, we hope that when you travel to the Paladeur that you find it as breathtaking as we did, and we hope you have time to go to the Panhandle Museum and see all the artifacts that we have collected over the years, and please partake of refreshment before you take your journey. And it has been a pleasure to have you here in my home, and I do thank you for coming. Thank you so much. underneath it looks like it's chocolate, but it has cinnamon and allspice, just to let you know that you savor it in your mouth a little bit. It has coffee in it as well, so I hope you enjoy this cake as you leave for your travels. Thank you.
Thank you.
They can work on our dairy, work in the dairy. They can work in our dairy as well. So we have come full circle, for we have seen the transformation of the plains, and our early dreams have been realized, all while after spending our lives in the dearest place that we have ever known. We hope that you find the Panhandle as breathtaking as we did, and that you have time to visit the Panhandle Museum and observe all the artifacts that we have collected over the years. And it has truly been a pleasure that you have come to my home today, and please partake of the refreshing